Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Wildcard Devy Show. As always, I am your host, Phil. I am joined by my beautiful co-host, Jack. And tonight we've got a really, really special guest. We're going to introduce James in just a moment. But first of all, Jack, how are you getting on, my friend?
Yeah, good, mate. Start my new job on Monday, so rapidly trying to paint the house, get the kids' bedrooms ready for the summer holidays, and start again on Monday. Feeling good. How about you? You ready for the end of school term?
School term cannot come soon enough. I am knees deep, elbows deep in my Scott Fishbowl draft, and we've got the tadpole draft starting next week. So it's a busy, busy time, but I'm absolutely loving it. Listen, you are in for an absolute treat tonight. One of the best parts about playing Devy is putting yourself in the position of an NFL scout or be an armchair GM, as we always call it, and to trying to evaluate that college talent for yourselves and thinking about those guys that are going to make that transition from college into the NFL to impact your dynasty rosters. So we thought we'd invite an expert. We've got James Ogden with us. For those unfamiliar with James's work, James is UK-based, Scouting Academy graduate, UK Ravens fan club royalty even, kind of long sheet writer for the Russell Street Report and Red Star Baltimore. James produces an incredible draft guide year in, year out, which is really niche compared to a lot of stuff that's out there because it comes really from that Baltimore team perspective. But the analytics and the details in there are second to none. James doesn't like talking about himself, but like to tell you what type of company we've got this evening. There were three guys in the run-up to the NFL draft this year who featured on the Baltimore Ravens official team podcast, The Lounge, where the kind of regular hosts brought in NFL draft analysts to give the lowdown and rundown on prospects and kind of how they saw the bigger picture for the team. They invited Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah, who obviously at one time used to scout for the Baltimore Ravens. They invited Mel Kiper, ESPN's Mel Kiper, the man who created the NFL draft, as he's kind of dubbed the godfather of the NFL draft when he's not having meltdowns about Shedeur Sanders. And then they invited James. The guys were clued into James's work, loved what he'd done, and invited him on the pod. So we are absolutely delighted that James will spend a couple of, an hour or so with us this evening. James, how are you getting on, man?
Great, Phil. Thanks very much. Thanks for the intro. You're right. I don't like talking about myself, so nice to have someone else talk about my work. But yeah, it's great to do this. This is exactly the stuff that I could just talk about for hours and hours. So yeah, excited to talk with you guys.
It's brilliant. And then the one thing we should mention, of course, maybe the highlight of your off season this season, James. Do you want to share what happened?
Yeah, I can do. So I'm lucky enough to be part of the UK Ravens and to have been part of our fan group for a few years now, and trying to sort of help build the fan base in the UK and do it through the podcast and other means and lots of events that we have around the country. And me and a group of dedicated guys do our best to make it work. And but we've had really good links with the Ravens organization for years now, and they've done some really good stuff with us. And then they announced a couple of months ago that they had marketing rights in the UK, and so wanted to start doing some stuff in the UK. And the first thing they wanted to do was to announce a draft pick live from London, and they wanted one of us to do it. And our group suggested that I should be the one to do it, given all the stuff I do with the draft. So on day 3 of the draft this year, I announced that the Ravens picked Teddy Buchanan out of Cal in the beginning of the 4th round, which was obviously like a bucket list, dream come true moment. It's weird saying dream come true because it's not something you ever really think you'd get to do. But for an NFL draft aficionado like myself, like I just it was a ridiculous thrill to do it, and it was great to do it with all my friends stood behind me and cheering it on. So it was great.
Yeah, man. So I was sat watching the pick on TV. I couldn't make it to London, but I'm sat watching it on TV. And I said to my son, I was like, "That's James. That's Oggy." And he was just like, "You know him?" I was like, "Yeah." And it didn't quite relate to the kind of 8-year-old and 4-year-old at the time. But yeah, it was super cool, man. And I'll just say you did us all really proud. Cool. Right, Jack, over to you, my friend. Okay. What on earth has been going on in the world of college football?
Well, the biggest headline makers have actually been not really practice related or injury related, so that's quite nice. We're not seeing any of our Devy superstars go down with season-ending injuries over the last week, unless I've missed something in the last 24 hours, which I really hope is not true. But we have, as you have quoted, some bulletin board material, one of which coming from Jeremiah Smith, probably not that controversial, because in the biggest rivalry in college football, you're going to get outrageous statements like the one that Jeremiah Smith has made about Michigan and the fact that he is basically never going to lose to them again as long as he shall live. So that's been creating some ex-beef, I'm sure, but only drives the narrative that this is, one of the biggest rivalries in all of American sports, let alone just college football. And then rather more out of left field, really felt like a swipe from nowhere. Thomas Castellanos has had a go at Boston College and basically said that he took on the ACC by himself and had no support from other players or coaching staff. So, really good locker room guy going into Florida State, and then managed to produce the biggest headline-making quote, which was, and I do quote, about Alabama: "They don't have Nick Saban to save them. I just don't see them stopping me." So he's I guess he's tipped his cap to Nick Saban and what Alabama were under the legendary head coach, but he really has set himself out a benchmark that Florida State are going to be much better than they were last season, and he is going to tear up the Crimson Tide. So, Phil, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
I cannot wait for week one. I cannot wait for week one to watch him eat humble pie. Listen, the serious part of that is I do expect Florida State to be better, but mainly on the grounds that they cannot be worse than they were last season. But yeah, it won't start week one. They're starting 0-1. Yeah, look, it's slow season. There's not a great deal going on at the moment. Obviously, summer camps will start in the next few weeks, but we are only about 5 Saturdays away now from the earliest fall ball, which is just a great feeling. We haven't got long to wait at all. Obviously, kicks off, I think, the weekend of August the 23rd. There's the Aer Lingus Classic in Dublin. And then from there, we've got week 0, and it'll be here before we know it. Cannot wait.
Absolutely. It's going to fly by in theory. In theory, it's going to fly by. But with all of the Scott Fishbowl drafts and the Tadpole Bowl and everyone getting ready for post-summer holidays, rookie drafts, I think we're going to be in a good place. We're going to fill our weeks until college football's here, and it will hit us in the face like the most glorious sunshine.
That's it. Well, let's crack on to business, because what we want to do this evening is we want to tap into the scout. Okay. We want to sit back and kind of soak up the knowledge and let the kind of watchers and listeners again kind of soak up that knowledge. I kind of want to start off, James, like with your experience of scouting and kind of going through the scouting academy. Do you take the opportunity to indulge and actually play a little dynasty football or Devy fantasy football? And do your league mates get totally and utterly fed up with you and think that you've got that inside track on them?
So I do play a decent amount of fantasy. I play in a couple of about 3 or 4 dynasty leagues. I play in 3 campus to Canton leagues and a couple of Devy leagues. And so I do it. I always keep myself about that level. I don't go any deeper than that. But I do it because I sort of would like to test myself and test some of my knowledge, because you want to get to a point and see like how much, when you get into a position to draft these guys, do you actually draft them and take them? And so I don't know that a lot of my league mates know. I play in a UK Ravens dynasty where they definitely know, obviously. And I get taken advantage of basically in that league is the issue, because I publish my thoughts all the time, right? So like last year, I've been in a deep rebuild in that league because I took over an orphan, and I had a I just had I had the little post-it note from draft day written down that said Malik Neighbors no matter what, and I had the number 1 pick. And I was like, it's just criminal not to get something extra for this pick, given that I'm going to pick Neighbors and everybody else in the world is going to pick Marvin Harrison Jr. And so I tried to trade back with the guy who had the 102, and Rory just took me for normally you'd get quite a lot for someone coming up from 2 to 1 in that draft to take Marvin Harrison, if you remember back a year ago. And I think I got a 3rd round pick or something because he knew I was going to take Neighbors no matter what. So, and I think I've been proven out there, although maybe Brian Thomas will end up being a better pro. But anyway, I think, so I do play a bit. I don't think in the Devy and the C2C leagues, they know who I am or know what I do. So I think I go a bit under the radar in those leagues. But yeah. It's cool. I think it's such a great format. I think Devy especially is such a great format. I really love playing Devy. I sort of keep myself on the low number of leagues just for my own sanity, but I do really enjoy it.
Cool. No, that's awesome. And then obviously, one of the things we always say is that watching film is such a fun part of the process. We do these shows and we tell people, we go away, we watch the film on people's behalf, and we kind of tell them what we see and what we think. But why is it so fun for you to actually get into the hooks and the crooks of the film?
I think the thing for me is that I got hooked on the draft probably sort of 17, 18 years ago now, and then started properly trying to watch players 15 years ago. And I've sort of developed over time listening to different people that I respect, both on American TV, but also, there's such a rich community now of draft analysts and YouTube and X and stuff. And so I listened to a lot of different people I respect, and then also went and did the Scouting Academy. And I think the thing for me is I think for those people who do watch, prospects from for a fantasy perspective, it really does add something, right, to when you're watching the draft, that these players that are going. That's the main crux of it for me. That was the first driver of doing it. Was I love being able to watch the draft and know these players inside out and know what I think about these players. But I think it's turned more into something where I think I love to try and weed out the things that other people don't see, to try and look for things and try and evolve my process so that I'm getting the best look I possibly can at these players and trying to spot that potential where others maybe don't see it. There's always there's a thing I've got hooked on that I think I've only got hooked on since I did the Scouting Academy about 5-6 years ago now, which is trying to. Lots of people will talk about how a player is inconsistent, he's inconsistent in doing this. And the Scouting Academy really pushed me to sort of say, why is he inconsistent? What is the reason? Is it that he's inconsistent because he's going up against a different level of competition? Is it because he's a running back running zone rather than gap? What is the specific reason why he is inconsistent? And so you then get a bit hooked and you have to watch tape after tape after tape after tape to find out why he's inconsistent in that. And sometimes it can be the strangest things, but once you get a player and you sort of get him and you're like, yeah, I know who he is, that's really gratifying now for me. So it doesn't happen all the time with every player because I haven't got infinite amounts of time to watch tape, but there's definitely been a number of players where I've been like, yeah, I got that guy, I knew who he was, and then he's come in the league and that's who he's been.
Cool.
Amazing. Any key players that you want to highlight now that you were ahead of the game on?
I don't know about ahead of the game because it's tough to look back and think, because there's so many examples where I've been so unbelievably wrong that those are the ones that stick out the most, because I self scout a lot in the off season and then start in the summer season basically and try to look at the ones I got wrong and think of why. But I think there have been a few in the past few years that are sort of high profile where I've been absolutely spot on. I don't think this was under the radar, but if you go back and read my Cal Hamilton report from a few years ago, it is exactly who Cal Hamilton is in the league. And the NFL didn't know that was who he was going to be in the league. And so I think that's the thing where you sort of look at it and you think actually that there's been a few examples like that where, I've just got that guy spot on. And there's different positions that I feel I've got better at over the years, and there's other positions where I think I'm still sort of developing. Wide receiver is one where I'm very confident in my evaluation now. yeah, it's loads over the years probably.
Great.
That's really cool.
Great. And so our next question is really, what would you say to the guys and girls that listen to this who are kind of worried or unsure about how to start scouting players and what they even do? What is step one? What would you say to them?
I think step one is like start to learn some more about the game. Like that's the first thing I would do. Like I would go into like, hopefully you've got to a point where you've sort of understood a bit more about the game, about American football, and you've sort of understood the different schematic things. But I think the first grounding you've got to give yourself is understanding a bit more about the types of thing you're going to see on a field. Because the biggest thing I think that people get wrong, because you can plug in YouTube highlights or whatever you want as soon as you sort of get into this, but the problem is you'll never quite see the player in the right way because you're not taking into account context. And so the first thing to do, I think, is to really get yourself, like, do it simultaneously if you want, but I think I would spend some time just understanding more about the game. There's the Inside the Pylon have a brilliant section where you can learn about different things of the game that you don't necessarily understand, and then you can progress onto some of the more in-depth content that's out there. Which I'll drop you some links to some stuff after this that you can send on to people. But I think learn as much as you can about scheme and get to a point where you try and understand the game as much as you can. But then it's a case of just diving in. I think just some tips I would give people, first of all, is where possible, it is better now, access to all 22 college film. Where possible, get access to all 22 college film. The issue you've got from a fantasy perspective is if you are watching TV copy of running backs and wide receivers, it's just not going to give you the full picture of the player. Like, it's useful, and you can definitely do it just off that if you want to. And I'm not a snob in that sense. I think you can get plenty of insight just off watching the TV copy. But the all 22, which is, like I said, if you dig on X enough, you can find someone you can find people who provide it. It just gives you a different perspective of the game, and you're able to look at things very differently. And like you're not try and be humble about the fact that you're watching it not necessarily as someone who's played the game or been an expert. And so you're looking at a running back and you're trying to watch the TV copy and work out whether they're doing the right thing in terms of the thing, sort of what they're doing. Running back's a great example of it, right? So you've got like what is being asked of the running back on the play. You're only going to know that if you've read a bit more about rushing schemes and how those work. And then the all 22 gives you the ability to look from behind the quarterback or from behind the safety, look at the overhead angle, and you can see, like, pause the copy several times and think, what could he have done here? What could he have done here? What could he have done here? And if you don't do that, you're not, you're not going to be able to see it in a split second. So anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but I think those are the things that I'd recommend to start with: is learn as much as you can about the game, and then start watching, and where you can look for the more in-depth stuff. And I'll have some specific tips on some of the different positions as well as we go through them, I think.
No, that's absolutely awesome. And it is funny that you say about all 22, because the one thing we get asked more than anything since we started this podcast, and the most DMs we get on X are always, where can I find all 22 film? And, hashtag no free publishing, but there is a very, very reputable fantasy football resource out there. One of the biggest kind of players in the dynasty game who do a great job of stocking film room for their members. Then again, one of the best ones I've cottoned onto this year is YouTube TV. If you subscribe to YouTube TV, there is more and more college all 22 film dropping on there regularly. And it's a great place to start. But don't do that to the extent where you stop listening to us, obviously. No, that's brilliant. So what we really want to do then, James, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, is we want to tap into some of the things you look for in terms of maybe not just with your translation to the NFL head-on for different position groups, but also those traits that are key indicators for success in fantasy as well. So I wanted to start with probably the most important position in the game. I want to start with the quarterback. When you look at and when you're analysing college quarterbacks, what are the kind of top 3-4 things that you want to see, and maybe kind of the first words that come out might be cliche. We hear people talk about arm strength. We hear about, arm angles. We hear about, work in the pocket. It almost seems a little bit cliche sometimes. So I was hoping you could kind of give us those things you look for. And for people who are trying to watch film for themselves, what that actually looks like.
Yeah, cool. I think the first thing I'd say about the quarterback position is the humility angle should come into it quite a lot. It does for me anyway. Like, I think there have been times throughout the years. So you mentioned in the open that my draft guide is Ravens focused. And so I do my analysis. I will evaluate a player based on who he is, but then I will project him to the Ravens rather than to the league. The reason I do that is because I do think it's really difficult for those national analysts to be able to project players to the league, where you will see a different range of outcomes for a player depending on which team they go to, which scheme that team runs. It's very, very difficult to sort of do a generic analysis and projection of a player. And so because of that, because I'm a Ravens fan, for a number of years of doing this, I've had the pleasure of not having to scout quarterbacks through the draft. Because why would you, when, I did start to a little bit around the end of the Joe Flacco era. And I would say that I was very high on Lamar coming out. But I think, so I do some quarterback scouting every year. And I think the first thing to say is it's the most difficult position to play in the NFL. So it's also the most difficult position to evaluate. So my advice on quarterbacks would be, and I still do this now to this day, actually. So what I will do on quarterbacks is I'll watch a guy. I'll start to form my own opinions based off of one or two tapes. And then I will go and watch JT O'Sullivan break the guy down over the course of a whole game. JT O'Sullivan, who does the QB School YouTube channel, and his Patreon is full of film where he just literally watches a guy for 45 minutes to an hour and talks you through what he's seeing. It's got to a point now where I can see things that he sees, and I don't necessarily need him as much, but it's useful to be able to watch it with a voice and sort of to be able to challenge and validate yourself, because it's just a really difficult position to evaluate. And so you should, where possible, try to bring in as much external expertise into the evaluation you're making and still form your own opinion. But, put yourself like you're in a draft room and you've got another voice in the room who's also talking to you. So that'd be the first thing I'd say on quarterbacks. There's loads of stuff to look for, right? And I think I think the way I thought would be good to talk about this is with the context of a player, right? And I think Lenoris Sellers is probably the most interesting prospect from a Devy perspective, but also from an NFL draft perspective, going into this next year. And so Lenoris Sellers is a really good sort of example to look at of a guy who is this guy and what should you be looking for. And so I think you should always with quarterbacks think about the playmaking ability, and watch for the first thing that jumps off the tape. And the first thing that jumps off the tape with Sellers is his ridiculous athleticism. Not just the speed, but also the explosion, the change of direction. His play strength is outrageous. And when I'll talk about play strength and play speed quite a bit through this. And when I talk about that, what I mean is the addition of your technical ability and so basically your technique and how you're doing things added to your brain and how quickly you process things, also added to your athletic ability. And all those things make up how good you are, how strong you are on the field. You can be as strong as an ox in terms of lifting weights, but if you have bad technique and you don't move quickly enough, then because of the speed at which the game moves, then you're not going to be particularly strong on an NFL field. He's extremely strong, ridiculous play strength. But then you start to get into him as a thrower and you start to look at certain things. The first thing to look at, you should always work sort of snap to finish, I would say. So always work from the start of a rep all the way through. So the first thing to look at is his footwork and his release. How does it look? It doesn't need to, different people have different versions of footwork and different release. It's very much an individual thing. But what you're really looking for is the outcome, how set is his footwork in the pocket? How quickly is the ball getting out? even if it looks a bit funky, what is he doing to get the ball out quickly? So you're looking at his release. And then the next thing you're looking at is basically the way I like to look at it is with pressure and without pressure, what is he like? And so if he's under pressure, what are the things what are the things he's doing in terms of, his accuracy when he's on schedule, on platform, in the pocket? What is his accuracy like when he's driving the ball to different parts of the field? What is his accuracy like when he's on the run? And what is his decision making like? Those are the things that I would be looking for. And then I'd repeat that process for when he is under pressure. And when you're looking at when he is under pressure, the other thing you're looking for is like, how well does he move under that pressure? How well does he adjust in the pocket? Can he make subtle adjustments with his body position and where he is in the pocket to be able to make throws? And how good is he with different arm angles? And so sort of sensing and maneuvering around that pressure is really important. But then what does he do once he has done that and gets on with things? And obviously, like I said, you're always looking for decision-making throughout that. I think with all of that, Sellers is a really good example because he's a guy who I think he's exceptional at sensing pressure and moving within the pocket to throw. Like I've seen plenty of examples of him doing that. And while it's probably mostly out of necessity because that offensive line was awful last year. When you look at it, it's sort of the thing that sticks out when you watch the film. But he's very good at evading that pressure to throw as well as to run. And he's actually extremely accurate, both under pressure and not under pressure. And when you say that, some people sort of point to the box scores and say he's this many out of this many, and it's not that accurate. His ball location is very good, and he's an accurate quarterback. My main issue with him right now is the fact that he doesn't go through progressions. At the moment, he is just a see it, throw it type guy. He's not an anticipatory thrower. They haven't asked him to be, but I can't give him the credit for having done that because I haven't seen him do it on film. And so you can see him do loads of things really well. And the first thing you should always look for in an evaluation is what can a guy do? And there are loads of things that I can reel off that Lenora Sellers can do. There are some things right now I don't know if he can do or not. I know I can't tell you that he can't do it either. And I also have to play into the evaluation the nightmare of an offense that he's in, and the Swiss cheese and offensive line he's behind, and will start to play and should start to play into the evaluation. But I think he's a really interesting case study. But those are the types of things I look for. In a quarterback.
That's awesome. Jack, is there anything you want to ask on the back of that?
Yeah, I think my main question about quarterbacks is how much does a coaching scheme affect your evaluation? Like how much research you're doing into an individual offensive coordinator or head coach, if they're offensive minded and they're in it, how much does that play into your evaluation for someone like Lenora Sellers?
Or another example might be the Jackson Dart evaluation of this year. There was so much made about the offense he played in under Lane Kiffin. Like how much should that come into the projection?
It should come in, but it should come in the sense that you should be able to see the things that you need to see out of a quarterback and make a projection. There are, like I said, some instances where you're just not going to be able to see some things. And right now, you can't see him go through progressions. You can't say that he's going to be able to do that at the NFL level. And you have to be pretty brutal about that. It's not, I hear people talk about stuff all the time about like this guy could do like, oh, he could improve in this area and get better. Generally, lots of things don't improve when you get to the NFL level. They often get worse because the competition is way better and you struggle in lots of areas. So it's very, it's dodgy ground to be projecting him to do something, projecting players to do something that you haven't necessarily seen them do at the college level. I definitely play in scheme. I definitely do. I think it is important. Context is everything. It is very important in your evaluation. And so you have to play it in to the extent that it, especially at the quarterback position, it's just so important. Like a good example from this year's class is from this upcoming year's class is Garrett Nussmeier, who I'm really impressed with LSU's offense watching it on film. And I don't know that I won't do loads of reading around the scheme and the offense, but I will take note as I'm watching the film, and sort of like I just appreciate good football, and I like scheme and I like that sort of stuff. So when you watch the LSU offense, I think it's a brilliantly called offense. It's a brilliantly designed offense, and Nussmeier looks in control of that. And I really like Nussmeier as a player, actually, as a prospect. But you sort of have to play into the fact that that is a hugely competent offense that he's playing as a part of. And while he looks in control of it, and he looks like he's the king of it, and I love how cerebral he is, how he carries himself at the line of scrimmage, and he looks like a guy who is just operating that offense at a high level. I have to play in the fact that he is operating that offense that offense is already at a high level, especially compared to an offense like South Carolina, where it's an absolute disaster. So you sort of, and it's an absolute disaster, yet Lenora Sellers is still finding a way to make plays and win college games. So you have to play that in, I think, it's just unavoidable. You just have to sort of understand how much you're playing it in. But the other thing, and we'll talk probably about this at some of the other positions a bit more, but is competition. You have to take into account competition, especially at the college level. And I think it's the one thing that I see people sort of fall foul of a little bit in terms of evaluations of players, where you're just sort of coming at it like in a loose way, and you're just coming to just watch a few highlight films. Like you're going to be able to watch some things that a guy does well, but when is he, like, what is he doing against the best competition? And I'm not just talking about like making sure you're not watching South Carolina against the Citadel. I'm talking about who is South Carolina playing in the SEC. What is the type of competition that person is for? Is it an NFL corner when you're watching a wide receiver that they're going up against? Like, is it an NFL defensive line that has multiple, like, going back to Sellers, they played Clemson this year. Peter Woods is, I think, possibly the best prospect in this upcoming draft next year, and he wrecked that game plan. Just he was absolutely ridiculous. He was everywhere, and they couldn't tackle Sellers. They just couldn't get him on the ground. Like he was running riot against a very, very effective and a very talented Clemson defensive line, and that has to count. Like basically, what that tells you is that he's the fastest guy on the field every time he plays, but he's even the fastest guy on the field against NFL level talent. That tells you he's going to be able to do that at the next level. It is not something that he's going to be able to lean on his legs in the NFL, and so you have to play into account competition as well as the scheme of the team that's playing.
That's awesome. One final one on that one from me. Obviously, as you do your kind of summer work and you're kind of building your board of prospects to watch, is there a player who you are expecting, might not be a household name right now, but based on what you've seen, might be come draft time at the quarterback position, that maybe our listeners could get a little sneaky Devy deep stash on?
It's funny, right? Because I think in this year's Devy drafts are going to include some players that won't necessarily be taken. So if you're in a Devy league that's been going 2-3 years now, there are plenty of quarterbacks that are going to get drafted that won't have been taken yet in your Devy leagues when it's depleted. So like Nussmeier is a guy who's available in a league I'm in. Sellers is available in both leagues I'm in. Like, so there's talent there, even at the top end that isn't taken. Obviously, sort of a guy like Klubnik isn't going to be available. Dante Moore, Nico, depending on how he does Arch Manning, those guys were highly recruited, so they're not necessarily going to be available. But there's a few that I think are interesting. The ones I would encourage people to just go and look at will be Fernando Mendoza. It'll be really interesting to see how he goes at Indiana this year. And I also would encourage people to watch Sawyer Robertson at Baylor as well, and just to keep an eye on those guys. Like I do think both of those guys need really good years to sort of vault themselves into the point where you might take them where they end up getting high draft capital to warrant taking them in high and dynasty league drafts next year. But I think those are guys you should be aware of and looking at right now.
Oh, that makes me feel so good. If you've not seen it already, go and check out my X thread on Fernando Mendoza and why I fell in love hard when I watched some of his tape. this off-season. That's brilliant, man. Right, if we move on to the running back, Jack, I'll let you take this one because I know you want to learn all about running backs.
Yeah, so obviously, so same kind of question. What are those kind of key traits in evaluating college running backs? But I want to add a twist of a caveat. So for a lot of our listeners, they probably knew who RJ Harvey was before he got taken by the Broncos on day 2. But I feel like the dynasty community has been taken a little bit by surprise at how highly he's been drafted. He's certainly gone up in terms of ADP on dynasty boards and rookie boards. And we've highlighted a lot about his production at UCF and the reliance that UCF had on him and the number of yards he was able to kind of rack up and the touchdowns, the touchdown heavy production he had. So looking at the traits, but also how does that production in college factor into your evaluation as well? Because in terms of fantasy, you can tie yourself in knots about how productive somebody is.
Yeah, and it's the first thing you look for, right? I think is that production. It's always plays into my evaluation. I will always look at there are certain things that I will look at before I even start to watch a player. I will always look at production. I will always look at certain stable metrics that we know sort of do translate across from college to the NFL in terms of positions. Things like yards after contact is something that does generally tend to be pretty stable in terms of how good someone is in that sense. The running back position. But what I'll also do is I'll look at their injury history. There's you should be looking very detailed at their injury history and understanding what they're like in terms of injury. You obviously want to look at their athletic testing, and at this point in the year when I'm doing summer scouting, I'm also trying to look back at their profiles in high school and what they did as a high school player. What I would say from a running back position is production is important, but production at the running back position is so much a feature of the offensive line and so much a feature of the scheme that they operate within, that while you do need a baseline of production, you are starting to you're looking at, if you're just looking at production and you're sort of laying on top some light film watching, you're not going to get to the crux of who a player is, and you're going to hit on some guys and you're going to feel good about yourself, but it will have been through luck rather than judgment. The difficulty with the running back position, I think, is that the most important thing for me when you're evaluating the running back position that will not get better at the NFL level, it will get worse if it isn't at a certain requisite level right now, is their vision and their ability to operate the running scheme that they are in. And I think when I say with what I say with vision is there's a few things you should be looking for, and vision's quite it's an ethereal term, isn't it? Like it's not really, it's hard to define. But what I'm specifically looking for from a vision perspective is how close are they pressing their keys? And when I say that means how close are they getting to their blocker that they are following? So if they're in a gap scheme and there's someone pulling across the formation, are they getting right up against the backside of that offensive lineman that's pulling and then breaking off that guy? The reason for that from a vision perspective is what you're looking for there is how well they manipulate the linebackers, the second level defenders, because the linebackers are trying to key on that running back and where they're going. And if you are like very quickly giving up your intended route as a running back, then you are going to get tackled very quickly against good competition. And so what you want to do is keep that as much as possible and stay close to your blockers. And so what you're literally looking for is how close are they pressing their keys? Are they within 2 steps of the backside of the blocker? Are they within 1 step? Are they within half a step? Like how consistently are they getting close to that person? And also what is their decision making like? And this is where I talked about sort of pausing the film and check and sort of constantly sort of evaluating the decision that running back is making, because the running back is making, especially in zone where it's not a predetermined path. In gap, it will be a predetermined path of this is where you need to go, and you should freelance if you need to, but more often than not, you want to get them on that path and the blocking needs to work for you. But in zone, you're making a decision about when to make your cut. And so you want to be, and the running back will be constantly assessing the situation. And so you want to look at that, like that's really important. I think like other things are like, how does he anticipate pursuit angles from linebackers is another thing that goes into vision. Like, can he see where this person is coming through and how where they're going to intersect and meet him, and can he adjust his path earlier on to make sense of that? The very best running backs are able to see third level defenders and what they're doing and make an account for that and think about how they can get 8 yards rather than 4. But also the best running backs also use their vision to be able to mitigate losses as well. And you don't want to see a guy constantly taking losses in the backfield. Like a Jaden Ott in his freshman year was very impressive, but he took a lot of ugly losses at times that could have been mitigated. And he's got better at that actually last year, even through his injury. So I think those are the types of things that I look for from a vision perspective. And I think it's really important to look at this type of stuff, because if you are not, that is the way in which you're successful at the next level. The most skilled backs, like Nick Chubb is easily the best guy I've ever evaluated in that way. Was devastated that he became a Brown for life. But he's a phenomenal running back, and he's so skilled. And actually, Derrick Henry is a great proponent of zone running now. Like, people think of Derrick Henry, think of this big bruising monster with ridiculous athleticism. He's an exceptionally skilled running back in terms of his vision, especially as a zone back. So that's the thing that I think is the thing that is most underappreciated about running backs, and that you need to start teaching yourself to look for. A big thing as well with vision as well is those, I talked about the decisions at different points. I haven't mentioned pre-snap. What do they see pre-snap? Are they identifying the defense pre-snap, and then immediately post-snap? Are they looking at it? And you can almost sort of split the box in half and see a decision that's made by a running back and say, okay, let's look at the box where you've got linebackers and defensive linemen, and you've got 7 guys in the box. 5 of them are on the right of the center and 2 are on the left of the center. Like, if that guy gets to a decision where he has to go right or left, he should be going left. You'll watch plenty of college running backs who will still go right. Yeah. I'm reminded of a Twitter account that used to do like a fun thing with Leonard Fournette, where they would be like, this week's episode of Where's Leonard Going? And it would show like this gaping hole, and Fournette would run into 4 guys on the right-hand side. And you can definitely see that with college backs. And sometimes they've got the athleticism to overcome it in the college game. That won't necessarily work at the NFL level. The other thing I just want to quickly talk about running backs is, I know I've gone on a little bit here, but would be like, so this is where you're starting to get into, and I'll probably touch on this with receivers as well, is like what levels of competition when you're looking at yards after contact. So I see lots of people who don't necessarily look at yards after contact in a very analytical way. What you should be looking at when you're watching a back get through the line of scrimmage and then start running, I want to understand, how does this guy deal with full-on contact straight up to his body? How does he deal with glancing shots that are coming off him? How does he deal with defenders who dive at his feet and try to get him on the ground? Like, what type of tackle attempt is being made, and who is making that tackle attempt? So is it a defensive back? Is it a linebacker? Is it a defensive lineman? And what kind of momentum does the defender have? Are they running up to the line of scrimmage? Have they stopped in the hole and they're meeting them in the hole? Versus what kind of momentum does the running back have? And in those situations, you can then start to build a picture of who this guy is. Because sometimes you'll see a guy totally run over a guy and think, wow, that guy's really good, like a physical guy, like definitely going to run through people at the NFL level. But it turns out it's the 5'11", 175-pound corner who's come up to the line of scrimmage and has stopped his momentum. And this guy's had a 10-yard head start and he's just run him over. Like, a 210-pound guy should do that. Like, it's not, you want to be looking at, like, how is this guy coming into contact? Like, is he taking, great example of this is Ashton Genty from this last class, where he could take all kinds of shots and carry on. And I love what Matt Waldman calls run stamina, which is like, how much is the guy still bouncing off contact 10 yards into a run after 4 hits? Genty just kept, it looked like it was the start of the run, even when he was 15 yards down the field taking his 6th hit. It looked like he was still that fresh. And so that's the type of like thing you should be looking for in yards after contact. Don't just see a guy run a guy over and think that's great. really like assess it and think about how, like, what is the context of that situation.
That's awesome, and you've hit on so many things there, because one of the things we always try and do in the off season for our listeners is we go away and we try and watch some huddle film of the highly recruited incoming high school guys. And that is such a difficult evaluation at the running back position, because these guys tend to have some bad habits because they are simply bigger, faster, and stronger. And so we see a lot of the time when we try and look at these guys, them bounce runs to the outside unnecessarily. And it's like, we find ourselves saying, look, to be as good as possible, they're going to have to get out of this habit. But it is that cliche phrase that people will hear and listeners will hear, their bounce runs to the outside. Well, you've kind of shed that out really, really well, that there might be a time to do that depending on what they're being asked to do. But it's that idea of doing it unnecessarily and too early when you've played on that idea of vision. That's awesome. It just leaves me to ask one question, because there has been a running joke on this podcast since its inception that I hate Nicholas Singleton. I had a lot of questions after Nicholas Singleton's sophomore season about his vision, and you touched on some of those things really, really well there. For me, there was an awful lot of his film in his sophomore season where he tended to either get up too close to his offensive linemen and was treading on the back of them and stopping all his momentum, or they were just downing him because he was heading straight into the back of him. He didn't seem to have a clear path. It does seem much improved this year. But I'm after a second opinion on Nicholas Singleton. Was I wrong? Is he better than I thought he was? Or is there still work to do for him to be a success at the next level, in your opinion?
So Singleton, I did recently. So I during this period, I'll do. I start populating these mini reports that I do, and then they might turn into a long form report if they end up becoming a prospect that I think is going to get to the NFL level and be a top 100 draft pick. And so I cycle through as many as I can during the summer. And Singleton I've done recently. He is a massive wait and see one for me, because the thing that I've learned, I think, from understanding more about the Ravens process is that the X factor in the scouting process is growth, and how much a player is likely to grow across the course of their college season, and then how much they're going to develop in the NFL. And I think the Ravens have got really good at identifying guys who have the kind of developmental trait that are guys with a growth mindset who are going to get better. And so you can really only test that if you get a full picture of the person. And so obviously we're never going to be able to do that. You're never going to be able to interview and work that out. But what you can see is growth on film. And I have seen some growth from Singleton, because I felt like you when I didn't watch him thoroughly as a freshman, but I did watch bits of him and definitely saw what you saw in terms of his vision. And there was definitely an improvement on that level last year. He still doesn't reach the highest grade for me right now, sort of preliminary grade that I put on players, because of that, and because he's not yet, I don't think, executing the position at a high level in terms of his technical ability. He's relying a lot on his athleticism still, but I have seen some strides. And this is the thing with college, is that especially when you're at this point in the process and when you're doing Devy scouting, like, you have to bake in the potential for growth of a player, and you are starting to see it with Singleton. The only thing to say is you've got to play in the same thing that you guys mentioned earlier, which is like scheme, personnel around him. Like, that is running back gold in Penn State. Like, they are going to churn out great running backs that look great and look the part, but then if you don't surgically analyze them, you're potentially going to take some guys that aren't necessarily going to turn into great NFL prospects, because they've lived in a very advantageous system and for a running back.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Let's shuffle this on to wide receivers, because wide receivers, without a shadow of a doubt, is everybody's favorite evaluation, because there is so much to watch, but they're also great fun. And particularly from a Devy and Dynasty perspective, they tend to be the position now. A lot of leagues to start 3 receivers, and then you could obviously even fill up 2 extra flex spots with them. Like, they're the people that hold value in terms of their trade value. And you can play more, a lot of leagues now are PPR leagues, so there's lots of points there for the slot guys as well as just the big guys that win on the outside. Yeah, let's talk wide receivers. Again, can you tell us what you look for, first of all, because again, there's those cliches, there's those buzzwords, there's footwork, there's release package you'll hear people talk about. You'll hear people talk about red zone threat and body targets and all these things. Like, kind of, what are the ones for you that really separate the good receivers that could make a lasting impact on a dynasty roster? And what does it look like when you watch it?
So I'll start with my biggest pet hate on that front, which is route running. I'll say route because we can't really say route, can we? I've enough American podcasts where I have to say, but route running is something that people talk about all the time. You hear someone say, "Oh, he's a great route runner. He's really good route runner. Oh, his routes are great." I cringe when I hear that because while there is a route tree, and you can go read about it and check that out, and I'm sure people have heard of the different routes that wide receivers run. Lots of colleges will ask receivers to run routes very differently. They will also ask them to run routes to adjust to the coverage. So, and you are never going to understand what that receiver is being asked to do on that particular route. So you can look at it and say, "Oh, he looks like, oh, he didn't really run a very good dig route there." You don't know what he was being called to do on that dig route. Like, you just don't. They will be running different things. So the main thing you should be looking for when you're looking at a wide receiver, for me, is the thing that sets people apart is how do they separate? That is what I want to understand. Do they separate with, and generally receivers separate with three things. They separate with athletic ability. So can they actually, and we should separate with athletic ability. We separate speed and strength, explosiveness, speed and strength, where you will see a guy just quicker than the guy that he's facing, whether it's a go route or whether he's which is a straight down the field route, or whether it's a more hard angle route where they are having to break, but then when they come out of the break, they're just quicker than the guy who's covering them, and so they get separation. Strength is another aspect of athletic ability, and you can see people separate just wholly with strength, with play strength at the top of their routes. Do they set the other aspects of ways in which receivers separate is technical ability, their technique. Like, do they run? And when I say run their routes, what I mean is that there are different types of breaks that are called for on different routes. It's generally, I would categorize them as 4 different types of breaks. You've got like a hard angle break, which is what you'll see on comebacks and on hitches. You've got a speed cut, which is where you're looking at a gap, basically short out routes to the sideline or in routes. A vertical cut, which is a post route or a corner, where you've got that diagonal break on the route, and then nod and go, which would be just like a double move or a stick route type thing. What you want to look at is how are they in their technical ability in executing those different types of breaks. And when you're looking at that, you're talking about what are the first 2 steps out of the break look like. So when they break on a speed cut, you want to see them make the transition from vertical to horizontal within about 3 yards. If it's a bit more high acceleration, it might end up being 4 or 5 yards, but you want to make sure that's tight. And what you want to see from that is their footwork as they're going into the break. Does it allow them to make that transition really quickly? Is that step into the break and the first 2 steps out of the break, are they at the right angle to make sure that person, that receiver makes the break really quickly and gets horizontal and gets out of his break? There are great receivers who are technically excellent who can just separate on that alone. You know, you look at like Keenan Allen's a great example of that. I mean, he's got plenty of play strength, but you know, he's not the quickest guy in the world at all. He's going to get open because of how technically excellent he is. And then the final one that you can sometimes see is like I said, I've done speed, play strength, and technical ability. That's it. So those are the types of ways in which receivers will separate. And I think what you can see there is that you sort of start to build up a picture of that receiver and how good they are at getting open, basically, which is the primary focus of a wide receiver. And so you should be looking at that stuff. You should also be looking at their hands, obviously. And you should be pretty surgical about looking at their hands. You should be looking at the different types of technique. There are all sorts of things to look at with hands. What I would say is, like, are they selecting the right type of technique for how the ball is thrown at them? Are they overhand or are they underhand? Are their hands together when they come up to catch the ball? What different scenarios does it take to break their technique? Does the ball have to be thrown high above their head for them to lose the technique that is normally good for them? Can they contort their body? What is their body position like when they're coming to try and make those catches? There's lots of stuff to be surgical about with their ability to catch the ball. And then the portion of the route that is incredibly crucial, but I would say is less crucial, I think, in the NFL nowadays is the release package, as you mentioned. Like, how do they get off press? And what you want to be looking for there is when they're facing press coverage from a defensive back, how do they get off press where the defender doesn't touch them? And how do they get off press when the defender does try and touch them? So with a jam and without a jam. And what that's crucial for really is what position, that, like how much versatility they will have at the NFL level and what position they will play. If you've got a guy who can get off press with a jam and is physical, you're probably going to see him be able to play the X position at the NFL. If a guy's better in terms of releasing against a DB who's not pressing them with a jam, then you've got a guy who can probably play Z or slot at the next level. So there's a bunch of things to go into a receiver evaluation. But I think, like I said, the main thing to look at is how does he separate? This is the most important thing for a receiver. And also not to underestimate hand deficiency with the hands. Like if their hands are really deficient and they do not have a great technique, it just isn't something that gets fixed that often at the NFL level. Like, people think, oh, he's got some drops and he's got some poor hands, but you can work on that at the NFL level. You can't. Like, they will have to have the get up and go to go and work on it themselves in the off season. It's not going to get worked on in a training camp. Like, they're going to have to work on it themselves. And if they haven't already been working on it in college, then it's a bit of a red flag. So, like, hands is something that I get on my high horse about, but because I just think it's just not something that translates well to the NFL if you're not good at it. And it's just so consistent. Like, Zay Flowers is one of my obviously favorite draft picks the Ravens have made over the years because we finally hit on a receiver. He dropped some passes, and I knew the type of passes he would drop at the NFL level, and he drops those passes occasionally at the NFL level. It's fine. I could isolate the specific instance when he drops a pass, and it doesn't occur enough for it to be a factor in his evaluation. Like, it just that instance is not a problem. Like, it means he can still be an effective NFL receiver, a very good NFL receiver. But in some instances, Quentin Johnston, the deficiency is that pronounced that it's never going to get better unless he works on it over the course of 4 or 5 years with a trainer outside the facility. To be fair to Quentin Johnston, it does look like he has been working on it a little bit, but it's taking him a long time because it's so much of a glaring deficiency. The only guy I could say who's ever sort of beaten me on that sense is Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin still has the most ridiculous technique with his hands, but he still catches a stupid amount of balls. I don't know how he does it, but he's the only outlier I've found in my time watching prospects. It's
really interesting, like that conversation there about hands, because we joke back and forth. We talk Devy players as stocks and shares. We encourage good managers to look for guys who are generating buzz before their drafts, to buy in, and then basically keep the guys they think are going to transition. And that's where the conversation about the tape really comes in, and trusting the tape. Based on, and then looking for opportunities to sell the guys that they don't think are going to translate. And I broke all those rules with Quentin Johnston. I allowed myself, I took him in the 3rd round of a Devy draft on the buzz he was starting to generate. He played the full year at TCU. TCU had a good season. He then gets the 1st round capital. And I turned down numerous requests to trade for him. I was like, no, I've got him now. I've got him. He's on my roster. He's got that 1st round capital. I ignored all the signs you've just talked about. And now I'm stuck with a guy that I can't get rid of for love nor money. I don't particularly want on my roster, but I'm also loath just to cut ties completely. He's a roster clogger. And it was because I ignored everything I knew I should do and everything I should follow, and the good process that we kind of communicate and that you've just spoke about incredibly articulately there, because I thought I'd beat the system. And the likelihood is you aren't going to.
No, Johnson's really interesting. So I always quote this thing that year when towards the end of the draft cycle, I heard one of the big national media guys say that they'd spoken to a scout and they said that someone in this year's draft class, obviously there's the well-known phrase that plays like Tarzan, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. They said that there was a receiver in this class that looked like Tarzan, played like Tarzan, had his hands cut off. And it was 1,000,000% Quentin Johnston. That was definitely who it was. And it just, if you can be surgical about it and you can identify the times when he makes the drop, when they make drops, you can start to understand what that is going to look like at the NFL level. And if you've been doing it a while, you start to understand what can improve and what can't improve. The big one I would say, and I don't know who coined this phrase, I think it was probably Matt Waldman, but clap catcher is the worst thing that you can be. And when I say a clap catcher, it's that you are bringing your hands together at the catch point. You should be raising your hands to catch the ball together. And if you're bringing your hands together at the catch point and they're wide apart, and then as the ball arrives, you bring them together to catch the ball, it's just true in most sports. Basically, you are increasing the variability of outcomes because you're having to time your hands coming together at the same time as the ball arriving. And it's just a criminal thing that if somebody is guilty of it in too many situations where they're catching the ball, it's just you are never going to get better at it. It's a muscle memory thing that it's not going to happen. You've been doing it this long. It's just not going to get fixed. So, but I think, like I said, the other thing to be wary of is separation. And it's a really important thing at the college level to make sure that you are watching for and understanding. Like, I can't tell you how many shares I have of Chris Olave because you could see really early the type of receiver. I think he's one of the most skilled receivers in the NFL. I think he's a terrible situation with bad injury luck. And there is still a point where Chris Olave could end up as one of the best statistical receivers in the NFL if he ever gets a quarterback. But it's because of how skilled he is. And you could see that so easily on his college tape. In some ways, he's a far more skilled receiver than Garrett Wilson is. He's a better wide receiver than Garrett Wilson. And you could see that on tape at Ohio State. So, like, if you can watch closely enough, you can see the guys who are real technicians. And when you add athletic ability onto that technical ability, it's a force to be reckoned with.
That's awesome. And there are, again, so many good things to take away from there. I really quickly want to touch on the tight end position. And what I'll say on this, and we will keep this one quick, because generally in Devy, we advise that it's a no-no. For all the reasons that we invest so heavily in wide receiver, we do the opposite with tight end. There's usually only one spot dedicated to the position in your starting lineup. You may be able to get lucky and play, take a guy like Brock Bowers and end up, with two that, one that you can play in your flex and someone like that. But given the traditional kind of cliche thing of late breakouts, making sense again of scheme and understanding how they project to the NFL level, whether they're going to be a kind of wide traditional inline tight end or whether they're going to be an F tight end and flex out wide in the formation. We kind of advise, look, in your Devy drafts, unless there is a unicorn like a Brock Bowers, stay well clear. So the question then is, a lot of our Devy drafts will have a separate Devy draft and then a depleted rookie draft. So we will wait until, there'll be maybe a 2 or 3 round depleted rookie draft for guys that don't end up on Devy rosters that can still get drafted to your rosters. That is where we often advise guys to find their tight ends. How do you find the right one?
So I think I love watching tight ends, and I think because it combines. I love watching line play. I think that's the thing I will get most excited about in the draft in the evaluation process is watching defensive and offensive linemen. And so I like watching tight ends because it does bring in like a bit of a fantasy element I can use, and I also get to watch them block. And I would just like, if you want to identify the right ones, just take some time to understand what makes a good blocker. I know it's not relevant for everything else, but they are not going to get on the field. Like, they've got to be an absolute unicorn to not block at all at the NFL level. And like people sort of talk about guys who like come in and they talk about move tight ends and people that like, you got to be absolutely exceptional to be a move tight end in the NFL. Like the offensive coordinators are just going to use different personnel. They're just not going to put a tight end. Like there are very few offensive coordinators that are wedded to running 2 tight end sets, one of them being a move tight end. So they've got to be really special to end up being that type of player. So you do need to understand which tight ends can block, or at least can be serviceable in that arena. Otherwise, they're not necessarily going to stay on the field enough to be a valuable contributor. I think the thing I would say is the same things apply from the receiver position in terms of the ceiling of a tight end prospect. You are obviously looking for a guy who excels a bit more on the types of routes that are going to be run at the tight end position. You're also obviously looking for a guy who can separate with play strength. That is probably more important in the tight end evaluation, and should be a bit more weighted. But yeah, generally it's the same type of things, and you can see when a guy is an exceptional receiver, and like Brock Bowers, you could just see it a million miles away. Like I can't tell you how many Bowers stocks I have, just because like he was deprioritized by people who don't draft tight ends in Devy drafts. And I think that is a sound strategy, but occasionally a guy comes along. The problem is I do this with I've loads of, I think there's a league where I think there's a Devy league where I have Bowers, Laporta, like you name the young tight end, I've got him. Because they just get deprioritized by people in Devy drafts. But that then presents a challenge in and of itself in fantasy anyway. So, yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's really, really interesting. And was there a guy you earmarked in this class? I mean, obviously the Ravens are famous for taking tight ends and making them very, very good ones. You talked about that developmental curve for positions as well. Was there a guy you had earmarked as one that you think, yeah, this guy's going to be a problem?
So, no, I don't think there is one right now that's a standout guy. I haven't done tight ends in depth yet in my summer scouting, so I'm not speaking to this out of through like a bunch of solid loads of tape watching behind me. The only guy that I know of, because I have him in a couple of campus to Canton leagues, because of how productive he was at Purdue, is Max Clare, and it will be interesting to see how he steps into that Ohio State offense and potentially then skyrockets a little bit if he is the guy. I'm not as high on, I'm really not high on Carnell Tate, so I don't know who the second option in that passing attack is right now. And so I think Max Clare could emerge potentially in that Ohio State offense. He might also go completely anonymous, but he's the guy at the moment that I'm most interested in digging into his tape from last year, which I haven't done yet, but I'd like to see that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Listen, you have been so generous with your time, James, but before you go, we are going to get our money's worth out of you. We like to play a little game to end the show. It is our version of a reputable fantasy football crowdsourcing site that we couldn't possibly use their name for copyright infringement. So we like to play Sell, Hold, Acquire. I'm going to ask you today. Normally we bring one each to the table, but we're going to put you on the spot, mate. We are going to ask for a very quick elevator pitch for one at each. You kindly sent us them before the show. So yeah, as quick, 30 seconds, 1 minute, bang, rapid fire. Could you start off, please, by telling us why you consider Jeremiah Love a Devy sell?
So this is a little bit controversial, right? Because Jeremiah Love is probably the only prospect that you have heard of if you're sort of a bit more of a casual fantasy player for the 2026 NFL draft. Like, he is the consensus number one running back right now. If you go and look at like the boards of guys who have already done way too early mock drafts. So this is a little bit of an out there one. But my issue with this is, so first of all, there are a number of times when I look at these, I've had to over the years develop a process for summer scouting where I can try and identify some of the players I want to watch myself, because those national media stuff that comes out with those way too early mock drafts are either information from teams where they don't want you to know about the player that they like, so they tell you about a generic player that they think people will like, or it's media members who have flat out not watched film. because there are times when players end up in those projections where I'm like, I watch them and I'm like, I mentioned Carnell Tate before. I like Carnell Tate. I think he's a good player. I do not think he's a first round receiver. I don't think he's a second round receiver either. I think he is limited athletically, and I think we'll see that start to him. I think it's a little bit of a, like, for people who haven't necessarily watched him in depth, I think there's an element with him of like, oh, he's an Ohio State wide receiver, so, and he's the next in line that isn't Jeremiah Smith, so he's obviously going to be a first round pick. I don't necessarily think that. There are ways in which he could raise himself to that level, but right now I'm surprised that somebody has watched that, and a national media analyst like Dane Brugler has watched Carnell Tate and put him in a first round projection. Maybe I'll end up being very wrong on that, but let's see. The thing with Jeremiah Love, to get to him finally, is I think with Jeremiah Love, he is where he is right now because of his athletic ability. Now, I'll caveat this with, I've seen a lot of growth from Love over the course of the last year. Like, I think when you watch his tape from the very first games he played in the year towards the end of the year, there's definitely growth. However, right now, I don't think he is a guy who's particularly skilled in terms of the vision that we talked about earlier. I don't think he's necessarily a technician as a running back. I have seen some people I respect think that he is good technically. So I'm really interested about how this develops, because I have seen some clips put up of Jeremiah Love that show him to be a really good decision maker and having great vision. I think double the clips that I've seen people put, more than double the clips I've seen people put, with examples where I don't think he's made good decisions and done well in terms of his vision. I think specifically he freelances a little bit too much and ends up running down blind alleys that he can't get out of. He's got, like I said, he's got better, and so let's see. But I think right now, for what I could get for him, I would sell him because of how much hype there is on him. He is a guy who might, like a la Leonard Fournette, be able to overcome it. He also might get better at it, because like I said, I've seen him get better at it. But my issue as well is that I talked about that thing earlier about like assessing running backs in different situations when they're meeting contact. And I could put up plenty of examples of Jeremiah Love getting, physical freak that he is, getting knocked backwards by defensive backs who do not have momentum at the line of scrimmage. And so that's a bit concerning to me when his best trait is that yards after contact type thing right now. I think he's living off a brilliant snap, where he gets into the end zone in a very unlikely fashion in the playoff game. Like I at the moment, I'm not seeing it. I think he has all the ability in the world, and so could end up looking really silly. But right now, what you're looking at is a guy who is considered by people as a first-round pick. So, and a lock first-round pick, and probably a lock 101, as most people think about it now in a dynasty draft. So, if you can sell Jeremiah Love right now, I think you're going to get a lot for him. And I don't think that there is much more mountain for him to climb from where his value would be right now.
No, that's sound advice. Sound advice. Okay, moving on. You are holding Auburn wide receiver Eric Singleton Jr.
So he's a really good example, right, of a guy who I talked before about looking for what a player can do. And Eric Singleton is massively, for people who don't know, Eric Singleton was at Georgia Tech. He's transferred to Auburn. Georgia Tech's offense it'll be interesting what the Auburn offense looks like next year, but the Georgia Tech offense is not great from an NFL evaluation perspective for wide receivers. A lot of what you will see Eric Singleton run at Georgia Tech is go routes and hitch routes. He's literally running either deep, or he's breaking off his route and stopping and coming back to the quarterback. That is most of what you'll see him run. So you've got to, with that type of evaluation, you've really got to dig and watch as many films as you can to understand what he is consistently as a different type of route runner. Like, how does he, the rare occasions when he is asked to run a dig route or when he is asked to run a post, how does he do? And right now, what I can see from him is like a really, I think a really technically sound wide receiver who processes the game well. I think he is very good at attacking leverage right now. So he's very good at sort of attacking what the defender is trying to do to him and breaking off that. he's ridiculously explosive. And so I'm not just looking for speed at the receiver position. I'm looking for that explosion. And you see that so much in his game, but he's so technically good too that it's very hard to read him. So he's so consistent with his stem that it's very hard to read which way he's going as a defensive back. So I think he makes subtle adjustments in his route that are able to get him open. And when I see him run the things that you don't see him run that often, I'm quite impressed. I do think he's got really good hands as well. So there's a lot to like in Eric Singleton for me. And the reason I'm holding him is because there's a lot to like, but also because I want to see him in a different offense. Like, I wish he'd picked another offense that isn't Auburn. However, it will at least be better. It will at least give us more to look at than we saw at Georgia Tech. And so I think for me, I don't think he's necessarily that hyped right now, and he's probably available in most Devy leagues, I would say. So I would, if you do have him, I would hold him. And if you don't have him, I would make it a priority-ish to acquire him. Because I think at the cost you'll have to acquire him, I think the value is only going to go up now for him.
That's awesome. That's awesome advice. And then finally, you are acquiring one of Jack's favorite receivers this offseason, and I've just realized I've not capital lettered his surname. How very poor of me. But Makai Lemon, wide receiver at USC. Tell us why you're going out to buy him at the moment.
Yeah, so it's not a great. So I'm talking. You'll notice here I'm talking in draft eligible guys because that's what I operate in right now. I'm looking at draft eligible guys, and so there are obviously some receivers out there who are not draft eligible who are going to be potential superstars in the league. But of the draft eligible receivers, Makai Lemon is number one for me right now. I haven't watched everybody yet, so somebody might beat him to it, but I think he's a really good example of a guy where you need to project his role at the next level. And again, look for the things he can do. So he doesn't have ideal size. And sometimes when you look at him, he looks like he plays a little bit small. But when I've watched him get jammed at the line of scrimmage, he can get off a jam. Like, he can get off press. It's very impressive the way he releases from the line of scrimmage. You've also got the way he deploys his play strength throughout the route is interesting. Like, my instinct watching him was going to be that there was going to be a bit of a deficiency from a strength perspective. There just isn't in the phases of the route that count. And then he's so explosive and precise with his routes. Like, his technique is great, but the athleticism is there in spades. And when you get the ball in his hands, he's just a weapon. And so I think he has solid hands too. Like, there is so much to like about Makai Lemon, and you have to sort of understand that there are, like, even if he is a slot receiver, there are I think he can play outside. I think he has inside-outside versatility, and those type of guys who make their living mostly in the slot in the NFL level but do have versatility are the guys that end up leading the league in receiving yards every year. And I think he can be another type of guy like that. So I would be acquiring him right now. I acquired him in a Devy league recently, where I basically swapped Carnell Tate for him. I think that is a smart move to make right now. I think people don't value him as the number one receiver in the class. And so if you have somebody who at the moment is valued ahead of him, I would be moving them to get him right now if you can, because I do think he is going to, like, I think that the only way is up for him right now in terms of his value.
That's a beautiful idea, isn't it? Let's sell Jeremiah Love for Makai Lemon and capital, because that's what it would cost at the moment. Like, that's what you'd get for him. You would be able to, in exchange for Jeremiah Love, you would get Makai Lemon and picks easily. So yeah, there you go. James, thank you so much for your time this evening. I am absolutely convinced that everyone who checks this out is going to be so much smarter for the experience. We're incredibly grateful. We've kind of tapped into that, those traits that we look for at each position, how guys can look for them on film, to make sure that everyone goes into the supplemental drafts this off season with the best chance of boosting their Devy rosters. Thank you so much again for your time. Listen, just a quick shout out. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me on X at NFL Ogden. As you mentioned earlier, Phil, like I do write for Russell Street Report. I have my own site which doesn't post that much anymore, and I have you can listen to me on UK Ravens podcast most weeks during the season. But the main thing I do is my draft guide that I work towards the whole year, and that comes out sort of beginning to mid-April. It's Ravens focused, but if you're not a Ravens fan, I do lots of analysis on the actual player as well. Like it's not just about the Ravens, although it is a lot about the Ravens. So that's the thing that I do most. And if you're interested in my work, that's probably the best thing I do all year. So watch out for that.
That's awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, James. I feel like we've really got an extra layer. I feel like I've been like, my views have been reinforced on certain players, and I love that with a deeper depth of analysis. So I'm going to be hitting you up to ask you your thoughts on one Aiden Childs at Michigan State, because he's a really interesting quarterback prospect that I want to hear a bit more on if and when you get round to him. But yeah, we are super grateful that you've joined us, and we are really grateful for everyone that has tuned in, watching us, listened to us on podcast. Make sure you're following us as well as James on X at Wildcard Devy, and following the main account, the Fantasy Wildcard Crew, on again X, but also our YouTube channel, and you can catch all of the great content that is dropping from all the different shows there and all the wider Fantasy Wildcard family. We will see you in a couple of weeks' time, and we hope you enjoy the end of the school year for those of you who are teachers. And, if we have any students who happen to be listening to us, go to bed. Good night.
Cheers.